My pleasure.
Yeah, glad to have you. I got to tell you now. Before I, knew that you were available to come on the show, you were quite helpful to me. Can I tell you a story about why you were quite helpful?
Please do.
Because I went and saw the movie A Serious Man, and loved it, and felt like I had no idea what was going on in the bulk of the movie. Like I'm like, I love this, and I think I should even like it more if I really got it right. So it kind of hit me with a a bit of surprise.
Very Coen-esque.
Yeah, very Coen-esque.
I love this. I have no idea why.
Yeah, I love so I came home and I got on the internet and I started hunting around, and I ran across a description of the movie, a description that was quite helpful about what was going on and the way they put films together and what was happening in this particular movie. And after I got done reading, I went back and looked at it, and lo and behold, it was yours.
Oh, yay.
So personally, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. It was, and I think that in some ways that's what you've tried to do with this book, right? You've tried to say, look, from somebody who speaks Coenese, let me help you understand what goes on in these movies and why that matters to those people who are thinking about life and faith and religion and spirituality and so on. Do I have that right? Is that is that a fair guess on what you're doing?
That's one of the things I was trying to do. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what else were you trying to do?
Well, this book is not for religious people necessarily,
Uh-huh.
but for those who are reading it and have that perspective, particularly evangelical Christians, which is the community I come out of.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to encourage them to look at things that aren't necessarily quote unquote Christian, but might have content that is helpful, enlivening in the realm of faith, and especially helping us understand other perspectives and how people see the world and how they see God and how they wrestle with that. And I hope that people will look at the Coen films that way and also take a look at other films and other filmmakers in the same way.
Well, I mean, you picked a pretty tough topic to try to convince people of, right? Because there's people who just can't stand Coen Brothers movies.
Yeah,
right?
so the Coens they either have rabid fans or people who rabidly hate them.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be anybody who's sort of lukewarm on the Coen Brothers.
Right. I happen to be a fan, but I'm sure there's a lot of people for whom, and I bet when you went to the publisher or when you've done book readings or when people picked up the book, they've thought, really, the gospel according to the Coen? Like I know there's those kind of religious people who say, yeah, there's good things in the media, like the gospel according to Touched by an Angel or something like that, but the Coen Brothers, I mean, that seems to be, full of pain and darkness and questioning and hatred and violence and all the rest of that.
Kind of like the world, huh?
Yeah, well, that's and I was wondering if that's some of what motivated you in the writing of the book. And
yes, definitely. What I've done as a journalist who covers religion for the secular media for a broad audience, I like to go looking for God in the places that some people say God shouldn't be turning up.
Yeah.
Because I think that's often the most interesting place, the most informative place, and I believe that all truth is God's truth, and it doesn't matter who's saying it or where it's coming from. If it's true, it's from God, and I think we should look at the world that way, and certainly look at art that way. And the Coen brothers are consummate artists, and they are also, I think, secular theologians in a way. And what they've done in all of their films is sort of probe the questions that really transcend any one religious tradition. They wrestle with the really troubling questions that I think all of us deal with as humans. About how do we really, who are we to each other? Who are we to God? Who is God? Is there a God? Is there a quid pro quo with God? If you're a decent person, when do bad things happen? I mean, all those really difficult sort of existential and spiritual questions are there in all of their films, whether they're comedies or really dark dramas. So.
Now, when you I know that as a writer and on your blog, I mean, you've titled your blog well before the book, The Dude Abides.
Yep.
So you've been sort of into the Coen brothers all along. How did that happen? How did your interest or
my romance with
yeah, I was going to try to find a good.
I think
the
first film I saw was Raising Arizona. I think probably my freshman year in college.
Right.
Having no idea who the filmmakers were, it was just one of those wonderfully quotable, wacky films.
Uh-huh.
That I fell in love with, and then I saw Barton Fink a little later in college, and I remember walking out of the theater and having sort of the same reaction you did of like, what just happened?
Yeah.
It sort of blew the top off of my head. And then over the years, just becoming attracted to more and more of their films. But what really sort of clinched the romance for me was The Big Lebowski, which is where the title of the book and the title of my blog comes from. A really magnificent spiritual comedy, if you will, that I think is, I've probably seen it, not exaggerating, maybe 100 times, and every time I see it, I get something new.
You're kidding.
Yeah, the Coen films are like onions. I mean, you peel one layer back and there's a million underneath it. And that particular film, I think, is just a masterpiece in that way. And so when I started looking at that film more seriously, and its rabid fan base, there's even a quasi-religion that's spawned from the movie called the Church of the Latter-day Dude, or Dudism, if you will. Yeah. And you can get ordained as a Dudist priest online and actually legally marry people. I'm a Dudist priest.
Yeah.
I started thinking about their other films. I'm like, okay, if this film has such a rabid fan base of people who are attracted to it, and 10 years on are still just passionate about it. To me, when I see something like that, a phenomenon like that in culture, I usually think there's something spiritual going on, and there certainly is with the Dude. But I went and looked at their other films. I started to look deeper and to see if that thread was there, and it is in all of their films, all 14 of their films, and some more explicitly and more articulately than others, but it's there, and that's where the book grew.
Now, have you had much of a chance to talk with them, or to meet them, or to interview them for any of your writings or the book?
Well, they don't really do interviews. It's kind of not their thing.
Yeah.
But I did have a chance to chat with Joel Coen a bit at the Toronto Film Festival right after they premiered their new film, A Serious Man. And they were, and Ethan was there as well. I didn't speak to him, but they both have the book, and they were wonderfully supportive of it in person. They thought it was hilarious, and they sat there and looked through it and were laughing. And I didn't get a call from a lawyer, so I figured that it was okay. So they must have liked it all right.
Yeah.
And I also, just recently, somebody gave the book to Steve Buscemi, and I heard that he really enjoyed it as well. So I think I'm onto something, at least in the tight coniverse of actors and creators there.
Yeah, excellent. Now I just, I know as an author that you always have these multiple audiences running through your head, and trying to think about how you're going to write and what you're going to include and not include. Did you have that fear of what would the brothers think about your interpretation? And
of course,
yeah.
And I say in the introduction of the book, and I've said every time I've done an interview, is that these are just this is what I see as an audience member, and what I do in this book is something that any audience member can do.
Yeah.
And I'm positive I see things that they never intended. And maybe they didn't even know were there, and maybe they'll disagree with some of it, but some of it they'll probably agree with as well. That was the impression I had. But yeah, I was very concerned that I was, that they would see it and go, "What is she talking about? That's just rubbish." But I didn't hear that, so that's good.
So you went through all of these movies, and you found some general themes in the movies that you reflected on and what they're doing. Talk a little bit about what you think. Like I have this sense that there's something that kind of eating at all of us, and the most interesting people are the ones who let that out and let other people into it, right? So they take whatever that thing is, it kind of gets them all fired up, and they make art around it, or music, or story, or businesses, or nonprofits, or they do something about the thing that's kind of eating at them. So I'm interested first, what do you think's eating at these guys, and then I'm interested in what's eating at you that causes you to do this together.
Well, I mean, the Coens come from a Jewish background. They were raised in St. Louis Park, as I'm sure most of your listeners know. And
yes, we're quite proud of that sort of thing. We keep track of all Minnesotans that hit the big time.
Woo! They're in their early 50s now. They grew up in the 60s in an academic milieu. Both of their parents were professors. And they grew up, attending synagogue. I believe both of them were bar mitzvahed and went to Hebrew school, but then sort of left it behind, as a lot of people do when they got into their teen years and older. And I think that they're still maybe wrestling with the kind of questions that lead people to abandon religion, or to abandon a particular faith tradition. Those really stubborn questions that don't have good answers. Why do we suffer? If God is a loving God, why is there evil in the world? If we're good to each other, why do we still make mistakes? If we do one thing, why is the reaction not always the same? I don't think they believe in karma and that kind of stuff, but they seem to, in all of their films, be wrestling with that. Is there a formula to how we're supposed to live? And if you do X, does Y always happen? And it doesn't. The thing that I respect the most about what they do in terms of the spiritual content of their films is that they don't try to give any easy answers, because there aren't any. And they're not afraid to leave really difficult questions unanswered.
Kathleen, thanks. Can you hold on through the break? Because I want to chat with you a little bit more about this in the next segment.
Absolutely.
Would that be okay? You can hold on? Okay, great. Kathleen Falsani, she's the author of the book of The Dude Abides, The Gospel According to the Coen Brothers. She'll be back with us here after the break on AM 950, the voice of Minnesota, DougBadgerRadio.com.